After being married for more than a decade, wife discovers husband's real identity. Audrey Phillips lost her husband and found herself trapped in grief. Without him, she had no idea what to do next. When she got around to cleaning out his things, a mystery was unearthed. Among her husband's personal belongings, Audrey learned that her husband's life wasn't as it seemed. Audrey thought she and her husband had an honest marriage, but what she discovered proved how wrong she was. Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. In 2015, Audrey Phillips faced an uncertain future. Her husband, Glenn, passed away after 64 years of marriage. With children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren running around, Glenn had left behind quite the legacy. But during her grieving, Audrey learned that Glenn had left behind an even bigger part of himself. Glenn Phillips was a civil engineer who always made time for his family. Parkinson's disease ultimately took his life when he was 83. Despite the pain and heartbreak that came with his death, Audrey never regretted marrying him. But with his death came the chores of cleaning up. What to keep, what to toss away. Glenn's personal artifacts needed to be looked over, but it didn't happen right away. In fact, Audrey found it so difficult to even attempt to erase the little pieces of her husband from her life that it took 3 years for her to start. And it was during this cleaning that Audrey discovered secretive paperwork. Audrey knew her husband liked to relax in his study and write, but the documents she found weren't penned by her husband's hand. They were written by a man she's never heard of before. One discussed the results of a memory test for the mysterious individual. Whoever it was apparently had a photographic memory. Why would her husband have kept this? Glenn wasn't someone who held on to secrets. He'd been private, but that didn't explain the paperwork. She looked through it more and more. What sounded like the plot of a government thriller was apparently very real moments in Glenn's life. Audrey realized Glenn's life had been in danger far earlier than his Parkinson's diagnosis. Another document was a letter about an individual with an unknown name. By reading it through, Audrey learned that a young boy had been pulled out of school. But how this boy and her husband were connected, she had no clue. Maybe the boy was an old friend of Glenn's from his youth, though Audrey didn't really believe that. Audrey Phillips found a final document that left her puzzled. A note with a telephone number was attached to it. At the top of the paper was written Operation XX. Audrey was stumped. Glenn had never shared this information or anything related to it with her before his death. His secret was only getting bigger. Audrey turned to the telephone number. She attempted to dial the number, but no one answered. It wasn't that much of a surprise. From the age of the documents, the line was probably too old to be used anymore. But then she received a call back. A man spoke on the other end. He revealed he had a connection to her husband, but what he had to say, he insisted, had to be said in person. By the next day, Audrey found herself in the company of the older stranger. He told the widow that Glenn had lived a double life, one she knew nothing about. The strange name on the documents, the young boy in the letters, was actually Glenn Phillips himself. As a child, he was gifted with a photographic memory, so along with 20 other boys from across the country of Britain, Glenn was selected for Operation XX, an espionage project during World War II. Created by MI5, Operation XX brought in young boys to be trained into becoming spies for the British intelligence force. Their goal was to give misinformation over to the Nazis. How they did this shocked Audrey even more. The boys were trained to carefully crawl through pipes in prisons. They were to gain the trust of German POWs being housed there. The training for the operation was a strenuous undertaking for the young recruits. Attendance at a gym was mandatory in the beginning. Glenn Phillips needed to learn life-saving techniques. As he would face something similar, Glenn and the other boys were also trained to crawl into a concrete pipe, entering it forward and leaving it backward. But before returning to the pipes for an escape, the boys needed to secure secrets from the prisoners. The risks of danger was high, but with many of the boys bored of school, they sought out these kind of adventures. Glenn Phillips didn't get to become a recruit all of a sudden. Audrey learned he needed permission. Glenn Phillips' father knew of the clandestine operation, and he was the one who needed to give MI5 permission. Once he did, Glenn was officially part of Operation XX. The old stranger had been one of her husband's fellow recruits, and the story he told sounded like something from out of an old spy movie. The head of Operation XX was a British intelligence forces captain. A name was never given, but it was his job to describe the next mission. Once World War II ended, the captain had a new assignment for Glynn. By this time, Audrey's husband had grown up into a young adult. Crawling through pipes was child's play. This time, Glynn and his fellow agents had to capture 2 spies. It needed to be an incredibly careful mission. The right individuals had to be apprehended and their locations needed to be noted. All of this would have bewildered any one of Glynn's future children, grandchildren, and so on. How did Audrey handle all this? Not so surprisingly, Audrey felt slightly hurt from the double life her husband hid for her. Though keeping it from her was actually Glynn's way of protecting her, she felt it should have been him who told his secret, especially when Audrey learned that her husband's clandestine spy work continued into the early years of their marriage. A few weeks after they wed, Audrey remembered how he disappeared for a weekend. Her husband had been on one of his final missions, and it was a dangerous one. Glynn and another spy carried out an operation to save an intelligence forces man on an incoming gunboat. It was a success in the end, but there was one last surprise in store for Audrey. The visiting stranger gifted Audrey with a handwritten note by her husband. It was to be given to her upon his death. He wrote about his regrets about lying, but also his faithful love for her. Despite living a simple life together, Glynn left behind a check with all the money he secured while as a spy. It was more than Audrey knew what to do with. Audrey Phillips took the money and donated it all to a veterans relief charity. From the paperwork she discovered, she published her husband's memoir. In the memoir, titled Operation XX and Me, Did I Have a Choice?, Audrey raises the question, is spying for your country worth risking your family's trust? This was a question many secretive people asked themselves during World War II, but as World War II gave way to the simmering Cold War, a woman named Sonia Burton didn't seem to be burdened with such heavy thoughts. She spent each day tending to her husband and 3 children, seemingly content with her ordinary life. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories.